Okay, so welcome to Beauty of Colors podcast, Barbara. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Cleanne, for having me here.
You're very welcome. So you've lost your son to suicide. I'm so sorry to hear that. How are you coping with this loss, Barbara?
Well, it will be 3 years in August 11th, which is coming up quickly. So I have to say I'm doing better. The initial year was the hardest. It doesn't really get easier, but you learn to live within it. So I'm doing better now. I've learned to use my grief to help other people. And that's the one thing that has really helped a lot is it gives me something to focus on. It helps me keep Kevin's memory alive. And I know that, his life mattered and maybe his story can help other people.
So what is it like, Barbara, to grieve a child? Um, how are you feeling? Like, what is it like to grieve a child?
Well, when it first happens, it's like being just run over by a train. I mean, you just hurt everywhere and you feel like your life has been destroyed. You don't know how you're going to cope. I mean, I had physical pains in my chest in the beginning that just it was like a heaviness that just would not go away. You forget for a second and then you remember again. And it's like it happens all over because it's so hard to accept at the beginning. It's like this can't be happening to me. My child can't be gone. So as time goes on, it gets to the point where you learn that each day you you have a choice to focus on the good memories. At least this is what I do, to focus on the good memories or to get really down and down in my grief. Sometimes you can't control it. You just can't. And it will hit you at whenever it wants to. It will just hit you suddenly. You'll be driving in the car or listening to a song or whatever you're doing, and it will just come out of nowhere. But for the most part, I try really hard to monitor my thoughts and to turn any of the sadness, I turn it to a positive memory. And that really helps.
So you did write a book about the loss of your son, and how can that help others who are going through the same grief in the coping mechanism? How can that help them?
Well, I've actually written 2 books now, and the second book I wrote is called Talk to Me, I'm Grieving. And that's exactly what it's for. It's to help take away some of the mystery of grief, and help people understand a little bit of what a griever is going through, because we're so uncomfortable around death and talking to people that are experiencing grief. People will look at me and I'll catch them looking away like, oh, I hope she didn't see me. I don't want to talk to her. That happens a lot. And I know why. They don't know what to say. They don't want to say the wrong thing. So in the book, I explain, things you can say that are supportive. I make suggestions, and I also have other people share their stories. It's not just a suicide or a child loss. It's loss of a spouse, loss of a pet, loss of a best friend. I try to cover everything I could think of. And that I hope is going to really help people, both sides, people that are grieving and people that know them and want to be helpful to them. And then go ahead.
No, go ahead.
My other book about Kevin's Choice, I think that was written more to show people, not just specifically about my son, because there's thousands of people like my son out there, and there's thousands of parents like me out there, but to show what it happens to a family that's going through drug addiction, to a family that has mental illness involved, to a family that loses a child. It's to show what he went through and that it can happen to anyone in any family. It doesn't matter how loved you are. Hopefully to take away some guilt that some people feel like they have a part in their child's choice to use drugs. It's usually not that way at all. So that's the first book, was kind of to provide education on what it looks like. I was very open. I shared things that I normally wouldn't share, but after I lost him, it's kind of like, well, what do I have to lose? I don't care what people think now. If I say one thing that is embarrassing to me, where I could be judged on, that's fine if it helps somebody else. That's kind of how I looked at it.
So, what should we never say to a grieving person? Like you said, you've outlined it in your book, the first book or the second book, you said?
The second book, Talk to Me,
Second
I'm
book.
Grieving. Yeah.
So, could you tell the listeners maybe one or two things that you should never say to a grieving person?
Sure. One thing I share is that any sentence, any phrase that starts with the two words "at least," try to avoid that, because what you're saying, at least you can have another child, at least he was really sick, at least you have more children, at least you can marry again. You know, there's all these at least phrases that people use, and really what they're saying is your loss doesn't matter, you should get over it, because you need to look at the bright side. At least you can do this or that. So that's the number one thing that I think hurts people to hear. Another one is comparing grief. Unless you've been in the exact same situation, it's not a good idea to say, I know how you feel, or I understand what you're going through, because we can't. I always recommend people find a support group specific to their grief, because those women and men can understand me. The parents that have lost to drug overdose or suicide, they really can understand what I'm going through, but no one else can unless they've been through it. So I try to encourage people to avoid saying that. And the one other thing I'll bring up real quick is that comparing your loss to the person who's grieving. Like if someone said to me, oh, I'm sorry you lost your son, I lost my cousin to suicide, and then went into a story about their cousin. Well, suddenly the focus is back on them, and they're not even concerned with you. They just want to share their story. So I know people mean well. I absolutely know that. And I don't blame anyone. I do it. We all make these choices of things to say because we've heard them over and over, and we think that's what you're supposed to say. But I'm really trying to help people think it through a little bit. So takes out some of the discomfort and some of the hurtful things that people don't realize they're saying.
So where can people find support? People who are going through that same grief, where can they find support? Do you have a website? Do you have resources that you can refer them to?
Yes, I have a website. It's my first and last name, Barbara Legere, Legere. And there are resources on there. But I suggest people that want to find a support group, you can Google grief groups in your area. There's many of them around. They're not hard to find. There's some international and national ones like Grief Share. I think that's national. The Compassionate Friend is for people who have lost a child. That's a really big one, and it's really good. The one I go to is called Solace for Hope, and it's here in my area. So it's an in-person group, but we also have a Zoom call every Wednesday night, so people can join that as well. But I think it's so important to find support. You may not be ready for a few months, 6 months, a year, but to be around people that really get what you're going through is so helpful.
So what's the stigma against addiction and mental illness?
I think people are still looking down on those that suffer with that. I hear it a lot that, well, they made the choice to try the drugs. It's, their own fault. Their life fell apart, that they're living on the street, that they can't stop using. And that's not helpful to anyone. Same with mental illness. You don't choose it. It's something that happens. And a lot of times people, they avoid those people. They think less of them. And that just makes the problem harder for the individual who's going through it. It makes them harder to ask for help because they don't want to tell anyone, well, I'm an addict or have a mental illness. They rather try and hide it, and they don't seek the help. That's probably the main thing that keeps people from going forward.
I think most people are afraid of what people are going to say and how they're going to react, especially family members. And sometimes it depends on the culture as well. So, yeah, a lot of people don't come out and actually say that they have this problem because of that sometimes.
Oh, yes, that's definitely a factor too.
Mhm. So, how can we help someone going through mental illness?
Well, that it's not easy. I mean, I tried to help my son through it. Obviously, I failed at that. He's no longer here. But being supportive, reminding them that they are valuable, that they are cared about, that they matter. I gave my son unconditional love. I reminded him constantly. And I also offered to get him help. Sometimes it's so hard to reach out for help. You need someone to come along and hold your hand and say, come on, I'm going to help you find a therapist or a doctor, or we're going to go to a treatment center. Um, just really being there for him because it's such a lonely place to be. And sometimes you just don't know where to turn.
Yeah, that is so true, Barbara. So is there any last words that you can live with the listeners in terms of coping with grief, in terms of how they handle it, and in terms of like how do they go forward in the future?
That's a great question. It's not an easy question, but it's a great question. And what I always say is I try to help people understand that grief is different for everyone. Everyone experiences it a little differently. So when you're going through it, be really gentle with yourself, be kind to yourself, realize that you've never been through this exact loss before. And it's going to look different every day. Some days you're going to feel like you can't go on, but remember that you can. Remember that you will laugh again, you will find joy again. Um, you'll never feel exactly the same as before the loss, especially with a child or a spouse, but you can have a fulfilling life again. Um, I just say to yourself with other people that get what you're going through, and really be kind to yourself. Don't have expectations that it will get over at a certain time, because it doesn't really get over, but it does get better.
Okay. Well, thank you, Barbara, for being on Beauty of Colors podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.